such as this is probably going to be a very short meeting. And yes, the last couple talks and the last couple Shakespeare talks have been under 90 minutes. All right. We're now, for the last time, and this time we're discussing opportunity space, which means dividing up the horoscope relative to houses, because the houses represent mundane opportunities or forms of experience in the same way that the signs represent attitudes or the spiritual qualities of things. We've mentioned it several times, but we're working our way down the profile index, and things are of increasing significance for the most part. The gestalts were of least significance, often because they're not even there. And then the attitude profiles are of a little more significance, but not a lot. And now we are down at the opportunity tests and profiles. And last time we discussed the division of space into contiguous sectors. That is a kind of explicit division of space, that this piece is here and this piece is there. Now we're going to look at non-contiguous balanced divisions, which means that it's more implicit. The pieces are scattered all over the horoscope, but nonetheless they are still part of the same thing that we're making a test for. The contiguous divisions of space. Just barely get started and yeah. The explicit division of space into contiguous areas gives you generally more large fields of opportunity. And the non-contiguous give you more specifics, specific kinds of things that you're looking at. And the contiguous generally give you postures toward life, like we saw last time when we were looking at East and West. We were looking at the differences between opportunities that are self-initiated and opportunities that are other-initiated. Those are general postures. Again, when we're doing the non-contiguous divisions, we're looking at different kinds of opportunities and not necessarily postures. And we're not looking at regions of emphasis, we're looking at functions of character expression. I'll try to give you some examples. The East versus the West indicated self-initializing versus non- or other initialized opportunities. Whereas if you look at something like the angular houses, they indicate something that's acute opportunities, which is something different than self-initiation. Or if you're looking at Western opportunities which are receptive versus something like the retreative houses, such as the 4th, 8th, and 12th, they indicate withdrawals, which is something altogether different than a passive posture. A passive posture is just receptive, or it feeds back, or it reflects according to what is directed at it. The 4th, 8th, and 12th indicate opportunities where you actually make an effort to withdraw from external activity and turn inward in some way or another. If we look at a quadrant, if we look at the West and the South, that is a cultural quadrant and an opportunity to be very much concerned for others. But if we look at something like a service house, that is an actual functioning kind of thing, and it's not just a general region of activity. So the contiguous divisions are helpful for understanding broad stances. You can look at the character at a glance. You can't quite do that with the non-contiguous, because you have to go into a sector here and a sector there, and you have to count them all up and add them up. When we do this, the non-contiguous divisions parallel the same tests in the signs. The same things that we got with the attitude profiles, we're going to parallel them now with opportunity profiles, but we're going to see that they change a little bit in the process. When you're looking at things in terms of opportunities, it looks a little bit different. So we're just going to divide by 2, 3, and 4. All right, I should do a little bit of erasing here. Yes? An area of space where it's all run together, the whole sector, all of its contiguous space. I'll give you, we're going to look right now at what non-contiguous looks like. First, we're dividing by 2. And when you divide by 2, you end up with the odd-numbered houses versus the even-numbered houses. So we have 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 versus 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. None of the sectors is contiguous with any of its kind, and they're equally balanced and they're spread out all together. Now, last time when we talked about the hemispheres, the eastern versus the western, or the northern versus the southern, we said we didn't do that with the attitude tests because in my experience it isn't significant. Because usually there isn't something really important. But the same thing can work the other way around. The division of houses into odd-numbered versus even-number houses, it's a very questionable profile. You're not getting something that is of standout importance. So we're not going to spend a lot of effort on this, and we're not going to emphasize the importance of it. It's just the opposite case, where we made a big deal about the positive signs versus the negative signs because they relate to very basic attitude stances. An extroversive stance versus an introversive stance. Everything in our life, we're either drawing on the spirit and extroverting things outward into the world, or we're perceiving things in the world and we're drawing in. Both of those attitude stances are significant. But the kinds of things that happen with the odds and even houses are not so significant. They're just, they're milder kinds of things. Now, we have to remember that we are differentiating houses from signs. And signs always mean attitudes, and houses always mean opportunities. Now, if we were to say that the odd number houses represent extroversive opportunities, and that the even represent introversive opportunities, that would be true, but in a quirky sort of way. It isn't quite that simple. It works to some extent, but you have to bend your consciousness to understand exactly the way things work. Clearly, for example, there are exceptions to the rule. Like if you say that the even houses are introversive opportunities, if you say about the fourth house, that's clearly true. That's an opportunity that's very much introversive. To retreat to your own home or to retreat into your own personal and subconscious, that's clearly introversive. But the exception to the rule probably is the 10th house. That's out in the world for everybody to see. There is a certain kind of loneliness when you're at the top, and that loneliness doesn't allow for a lot of introspective opportunities and such. But that it isn't quite that simple. So I've chosen different kinds of words rather than just saying introversive versus extroversive. This problem, or this philosophical idea of comparing signs and houses, is much more easy to understand if we realize that the signs need the houses and the houses need the signs. That is, without forms, without molds, the attitude or the spiritual actions can't manifest. It needs some kind of channeling. It needs some kind of form to work through. Similarly, opportunities or forms of experience need meaning. They can't just be empty things that hold something and without even holding anything. It's easy to see the dependencies or the interdependencies between signs and houses when there are displacements. Probably a displacement by one is the simplest. So suppose we put Taurus on the first house cusp, Aries on the second, Pisces on the third, or we're going the wrong direction here. This is a displacement by one. Normally, the second house is a house that is more a house of receptivity. But when you put Aries on it, the active attitude to some extent overpowers the receptive nature of the even-numbered house. And similarly, the shy Piscean ways bring down the proactive potential of the first house to be able to get out and do something in the world. So there is such a thing that in this kind of exchange, the houses seem to suppose you put Aries, put the sun in Aries, the attitude overpowers the house. But on the other hand, let's make a totally different combination. Let's put Pisces on the fifth and put the moon in it. That isn't quite enough to overcome the outwardness. The moon in Pisces in the fifth house would still be shy and demure and very sensitive, but it isn't enough to overcome the change of the house so that a person still wouldn't be excessive. It would probably be something like a cult entertainer. That's what I usually find when there are really sensitive things in houses that, you know what I'm talking about, cult entertainers? There are people that have special followings. Like I'm thinking, there are big cults, like the Grateful Dead were a big cult, but there were only a certain kind of people that were interested in that movie. I did remember the name of the other group that has a cult following that's taken over, I guess, sort of since the Grateful Dead. Fish, yes. Yes. Do they really call them fish heads? I have a friend that is a fish head. But at any rate, when there are displacements of signs and houses, there are some tendencies for the sign to overcome the house or for the house to overcome the sign, but that's, they're not really strong. All right, let's look at characteristics of the odd signs of odd number houses versus the even number houses. The odd number houses represent opportunities that are direct or directable or directive opportunities. Something where you can take charge and do something about it. This is the most important distinction. Whereas the even number houses represent circumstantial opportunities. That the circumstance of the opportunity allows less freedom of choice. No matter what sign is on the cusp, the houses are circumstantial or sometimes even fatal. Probably the 12th and 1st house are the epitomes. The 1st house gives one the most freedom to change things on the fly, whereas the 12th house is the most fated. The odd number houses are houses that are freeing or are themselves free. That there's some kind of a quality that, like you're free to express yourself any way you want in the 5th house, or the epitome being the 11th house. It's like a utopian kind of freedom. Everything is free form. In fact, the less form there is, the better. Whereas the even number houses are much more controlling. They're much more limiting. Take, for example, the 2nd house. When you're dealing with stuff, stuff is what it is. You can't make it something else. And then to a certain extent, an artist is limited by the nature of the stuff and can't just make everything be what he or she would like it to be. Another example probably would be the 8th house. You can think about death and you can prepare about death, but there's not a lot that you can do about it. It has its own control. The odd number houses are much lower in their formality. There is something much more casual about them, something much more incidental. Whereas the even number houses are high formality. Probably the 10th house being an epitome of that. Everything, has its protocol, and you have to do the right thing at the right time in the right way. And so they're that kind of a thing. The odd number houses are much more fluent opportunities. You can think of the odd number houses as being freewheeling. You can do everything on the fly. Whereas the even number houses usually represent things that are much more holding or much more fixed. And finally, there is a word that used to be used in the language much differently than it is now, and we're going to use it in that classical sense. The odd number houses are accidental. The philosophers, going back to Aristotle, used to say that there are essential things and accidental things. That is, things that must be taken care of, or that must be part of something, like the horsiness of a horse. But the fact that the horse has a tail with all kinds of strands, that's accidental. That isn't essential to it being a horse. You can cut the tail off of the horse and it'll still be a horse. And characteristics that seem to be from the ways of the world or from the forms of the world seem to be accidental are ruled by the odd houses. Whereas the things that are more tendentious, much more directed, and much more essential in their form are ruled by the even number houses. And then, of course, we can add in the ones that we began with. The odd number houses represent roughly extroversive opportunity, and the even number houses represent introversive opportunities. Now, there are curious things about houses philosophically that we very rarely think of. Astrologically, if we take the doctrine correctly, it's easy to see how we carry attitudes around with us. Even if one has a concept of us living in a little aura that is like in our own little solar system, it's easy to see how we carry our own field of attitude, our own atmosphere, our own little cosmos around us, with us, and that we're always looking through our own psychology. That's fairly easy to see. But it's not so easy to see that we carry the opportunities around with us. That what is going to happen to us in the world as a consequence of our crystallization of character, we carry that right around with us. All the forms of experience are right within our being, and the fact that we are going to attract ourselves to a job or to a lover or to something like that, the form that the experience is going to take is taken right along with us is not obvious, but it does. I had an experience of how it does work once. Many years ago, probably 30-some years ago, there used to be, where Menards is on the south side, there used to be a Koepsel food market there. In fact, it's still called Koepsel Avenue. And I was on a grape juice fast. And a number of us, that food market was open all night long. And I said, I got to need some grape juice. Let's go out and get some grape juice. And we fanned out and we walked all through the store to find the grape juice. And a funny thing happened. I'm walking along, and as I turned down an aisle, this little tiny man, older, probably my age now, then, tiny little man, he cringed at me as though I was some kind of an ogre, and some really nasty being. And do you know what happened? What came out of me was a very fierce attitude until I caught myself. And that was a defining moment in my life, because I realized that he was carrying around the form of experience with him. It's like he had railroad tracks into his psyche, that his interaction with the world was going to be one that he was going to be persecuted by the world, and the world was going to see him that way. And now part of that was attitude, but part of it also was the form of opportunities that he produced for himself. He produced opportunities whereby he was almost certain to be discriminated against, or to be martyred, or to be picked on, or something like that. And that, I believe, is a mild, not really mild, but a very clear example of the fact that we carry attitudes around with us, and that we carry forms of experience around with us, that they have to happen that way because that's the way the mold is. And no matter what you're pouring into the mold, whether it's lead or gold or iron, because the mold is a certain shape, everything's going to come out being that shape. Now, there are other things about astrology that are curious. Now, I'm going to introduce you to pure astrology now. That is like all the astrological types do, because I don't want you being ignorant of what's going on in the world. When we come to the implicit division of opportunity space by threes into the four angulations, something happens that is very unusual. The traditional claim of astrology is that the angular houses accentuate the strength of an experience, whereas the succeedent houses remain on a par basis and decadent houses actually weaken. So that there's a difference between angular, succeedent, and cadent houses in that the form of experience weakens or strengthens the astrological content of that form of experience. Now that's a very unusual idea. They leave it on a constant basis. It's like par, and this is above par, and that's below par. Now, philosophically, it's a tough question to ask. Is it true that some forms of experience blunt astrological or character expression? Now, modern statistical astrologers claim this is humbug. Most especially, there was a school of statistical astrologers that was spawned by a man from France called Michel Gauquelin. And he took tens of thousands of horoscopes and he did statistical studies on them. And he could not find that the traditional houses went as they thought they went, and that the angular, succeedent, and cadent didn't work as traditional astrologers claim. And he produced or presented his statistical evidence. Having looked at all of that and having looked at a lot of things that statistical astrologers do, I find that the works of statistical astrologers are very much like the work of statistical sociologists. Anytime that you're trying to, in a non-observational way, that is without an intuitive spirit that can grasp what is being said and that can see for itself, it is extremely hard to qualify psychological or sociological data. If we say that Mars in Sagittarius square to Uranus produces a certain kind of anger, we can describe that pretty accurately. But statistically, there's no way that you can really do that. It's hard to even quantify whether somebody is moderately angry or incensed, or whether the anger lasts for a short time or a long time. You just can't do that with statistical tools in psychology or in sociology. And every time that I have read psychological or sociological statistical studies, whether they're done by astrologers or not done by astrologers, the whole manner of defining the experience is so crude. They're so crude because they're not talking to an intelligence, they're talking to a statistical analysis method. And consequently, I'm not sure what people are finding when they do statistical analyses of things. And so I question, personally myself, I question all of the whole field of statistical astrology, though I'm interested in doing some of it myself, probably in a much different way. But I question the validity of it because it's almost impossible to, use a dumb machine versus an intelligent, intuitive individual. On the other hand, I'm not a traditionalist, but I can find agreement with the tradition in this sense. If we think about it, the angular houses represent the most fundamental relationships in life. We talked about it last time when we talked about the vertical and the horizontal, that there were even special cases in terms of the effect of gravity in the horizontal and vertical. But if it's the first house versus the seventh house, it is a me and you kind of conflict. And it's a matter of accommodation. It's a head-on kind of conflict. Marriage is very hard. Sometimes you can pull together if you're all in the seventh house, but among people where the individuation is high, the personality becomes very strong, and the person who represents the individuality has an equally strong personality, and that is a high impact or an accentuated house. Moreover, those who are above us and those who are below us, especially since they happen to be our parents who work directly or indirectly as the boogeyman, or the boogie woman, either way, those are fundamental relationships. The parental relationships are the first relationships we have in life. When we're little tiny babies and we don't know anything, our character, our experience, and everything that we see is molded by the parents. So I can see that those are accentuated relationships, the angular relationships. I think it makes a lot of sense. Especially the primary angles are the 10th house, and the most primary of all angles is the first house. And if you think about it, there is not a psychologist or a psychiatrist that doesn't believe that the first years of life are very, very important in the development of the whole character. Mystics who read past lives say that the experiences in the first few years of life are how all the past lives things are built into the body. And they stay built right into your body unless you get them rolfed out or unless you do major character change. So it's not surprising. The physical body is your interface with the world. I can certainly see why that is a more important house. On the other hand, profession and the authorities or people who hold power over you and your ultimate goals in life, I can see why those would be stronger. And I can also, by the same account, see why the cadence signs are weakened, because they are second-hand experiences. And second-hand experiences are never as strong, like if it's all you got this result because of theory, or you got this understanding, like you understand the Grand Canyon because you read a book about it. That's not the same thing as going into the Grand Canyon. So the cadent houses have something indirect about them, and that indirection about the cadent houses weakens the experience. So to some extent, what I'm saying is, what I'm presenting to you is controversial, and if you go along with what I'm saying, which happens to agree with tradition, you'll probably be seen by the young astrologers. I don't know whether they wear their hats with the rim backwards or not. You're going to be seen as old-fashioned, and they're going to say that isn't so, but I think that there's plenty enough experience of life to substantiate it and indicate that it is true. Two can live cheaper than one, probably because they fight over how the money is going to be spent, and they never get around to the time of how they're spending it. No, I'm just saying that partnership is. Yeah, I'm saying that the fundamental on-evens relationships, like it, for example, the first and seventh is just not just self and partner. In all athletic contests, for example, it is the challenger versus the champion, or it is the home team versus the away team, and there is inherent in it, there is conflict. And I think that the relationship of the personality being whittled down by the partner, or that the partner has to come out relative to the relationship, is a big part of marriage. Marriage is not easy, and I don't believe it is intended to be easy, because two people cannot get that close and cannot be as one without there being some conflict, especially among people like ourselves that are very strong individuals. And so that relationship is basically a conflict relationship, even though the ideal is Libran, and the ideal is Venusian, which means harmony and teamwork and all of that. That is the ideal, but it's not in practice, or the working out of it doesn't come very easily. We're coming to, we're just talking about here, this is just a side trip. We haven't gotten to the, to the material yet. The odds and evens, as well as the angularities, are both based on conflict. The odds and evens represent the strongest astrological conflict of all. Whether it be in the signs or in the houses, the greatest differences are in adjacents. Aries is very much different than Taurus or Pisces, much more different than it is to Libra, because they're both cardinal signs. But it certainly doesn't like the misty ways of Pisces, and it doesn't like the blockheaded ways of Taurus. It just wants action, and the adjacent, the adjacencies represent the biggest differences. Similarly, in the houses, the first house is very, very different than the second or the 12th. It doesn't, the first house is, I'm a self-determining individual. I can determine my life however I want it to be. Whereas the 12th house is more of a kismet house. It's fate. This is, you're so overburdened by your past that it hasn't been taken care of that you have no choice but to surrender to it, because that's the only way that you can heal the hangover from the past. And the second house is such, like the first house would just as soon keep on going and doing new things all the time, whereas the second house anchors you down with steady, ongoing responsibilities. Similarly, the angularities also are based on conflict. But the conflict of the angularities is more the conflict of the cross. That is, of oppositions and of squares. And probably it comes out the most clear in the succedent houses. Like if something is present, you often don't understand the meaning of it. But if it's gone, the inner meaning is very much understood, and it takes the absence of the thing to appreciate what it was when it was there present. The best or the strongest conflict in the angularities is really obvious in the square part. We even have a maxim about it. For example, the relationship between the 11th house and the second house. We say if you want to lose a friend, you lend him money. And so there's that battle between possession and ownership and free, unconditioned friendship. Similarly, there's you can't have a lover without losing money. They're expensive one way or another. All right. All right. We're almost done for tonight already. Yeah. No, but it's all based on the same cross. That the struggle within an angularity is the totality of the cross. All right, let's look at some comparative things now. The angles represent relationships that are initial or that are crucial, whereas the succedent houses by parallel represent things that are sustained, something that are ongoing, that last forever, and they aren't just starting or crucial things. And the cadence signs represent things that are fluctuant, either passing from stable to change or from change to stable, and they represent opportunities that are indirect. Angular houses represent acute opportunities, especially if you get into medical things. Acute illnesses are associated with angles, whereas chronic things are associated with fixed, whereas mitigating or variable things are associated with cadent houses. Angular houses represent basic assertions, and the succedent houses represent the needs that are associated with those assertions. And the cadent houses represent the means or the method or the knowledge that is associated with those same assertions. Angular houses represent motive opportunities. Succedent houses represent means to those motives. And the cadent houses represent the rationale for those motives. Angular houses are opportunities that you don't have time to think, whereas the cadent opportunities are when you do take thinking. Angular opportunities are impelling opportunities. Succedent are freeing, and cadent are detaching. Angular opportunities are leadership opportunities of one kind or another. Succedent are responsibility, and cadent are advisory. I'm trying to think and read at the same time here. Doesn't work so well. The succedent houses represent the responsibilities, the material responsibilities, or our children as our expressive responsibilities, or our debts to society, those kinds of responsibilities, or what we owe to our friends, or what we owe to the cosmos at large. But at the same time they represent responsibility. The responsibility is determined by the initial house. And the initial house is the responsibility house. The ultimate also gives an insight into the distribution. Are you being able to see all right? The ultimate in this case is freedom. So the second house is financial freedom. The fifth house is freedom of expression. The eighth house is freedom from things that you've rid yourself of. And the 11th house is general freedom. In any grouping of signs or houses, but especially in houses, the initial gives one part, one of the fundamental meanings of the grouping, and the terminal gives another fundamental meaning of the grouping. This is another one of those tools that you can analyze any group of signs or any organization of houses or a series of aspects or something like that by looking at the initial and at the terminal. It gives you an insight into something of the meaning of that.
The initial
The initial, the first one in the mandala.
So if it ends up being, instead of Taurus, it ends up being...
No, we're talking about the second house is always, in the mandala, the second house is always the first of the succeedent houses. And the ultimate of the succeedent houses is always the 11th. Yeah. Oh, we did a lot of that in the beginning. There's going to be more. I've got all kinds of, I've got all kinds of notes. You know, I'm just trying to give you the basic ideas and what's behind it. Now, you're going to get a handout in just a minute that covers everything that is here, only in words, just very few words. There is a, I don't know how to say it. We can combine the two tests and profiles that we've already looked at this evening, and that gives us a table of 6 different kinds of houses. For example, there are odd-numbered angular houses, and the odd angular houses in the 7th. So if you take the key principles from the angular signs and from the odd signs, you can put them together and you can understand that pair of signs. And so you get something like sharp freedom, or you get decisive extroversion. The even angular houses are the 4th and the 10th, and when you put them together, you get something like acute formality, or acute informality, or circumstantial relations. And so, in these things, in the handouts that you're going to get in just a minute, there are tables of all of the 6 poles that are like that, and it's a good way. See, the name of this course is Character Appreciation with Astrology. It could almost just as well be called Life Appreciation with Astrology, because our relationship to all of life in abstract as the universal ideal is symbolized in the mandala. And therefore, like when we're saying that the ultimate responsibility is to every other human being, that's saying something about life. And so when I try to make these tables of polarities, or like when we were working with the attitude profiles, we were looking at atmospheres and things like that. What we're trying to get at is we're trying to get at reality, trying to get at life so that we can understand what life is, because what has happened to us as human beings is we have become so subjective and we live in our own world that we're deviated from any kind of cosmic standard. And we aren't what human beings were intended to be, because we're almost a profile of our special perversions. And what we're trying to do with astrology is we're trying to understand, like, what is the ultimate standard for friendship, or what is the ultimate basis for freedom, so that we can see how we are deviate from it, and in that deviation, how we can, in our own special way, angle ourselves to work at least as harmoniously as we can with the cosmic standard. And that's why I try to put these extra things in. All right.
Richard?
Yes?
What are you looking for in a chart? I mean, these combinations could be almost endless. Are you looking for groupings of planets?
Yes.
Strength of planets?
What we're doing, the test and profile, is that we count, just like we did with the attitudes. And so when we count the angular, succeedent, and cadent, we see whether there's a likelihood that there are going to be more opportunities that are accentuated or that are based on the fundamental relationships of the nuclear family, the parents and the spouse, or whether the relationships are going to be the kind that, you just got to hang in there and be steady with it forever and ever, or whether they're going to be vicarious The cadent relationships or the cadent opportunities are vicarious. They're lightweight, and you can learn from other people's mistakes, and you can learn very quickly without having to go through all the hard stuff yourself. But what we're trying to get at is what kinds of opportunities are going to be presented to a person, and from that we can see, what their character is, in what they're intending to do with their character. If they have an enormous amount of things in the angular houses, it means that family things and those basic relationships of the horizontal and the vertical are very important to life. And that you know a lot about the person, and you can get the person to work with those things. And if they are angular, there are very likely to be a lot of squares in there. All right. It's good that you bring that up, because now we're coming up to the last of the opportunity profiles. And since it's the furthest down on the chart, it is more important than all of the others, probably more important than all of the others put together. And we're becoming more and more precise in what we're finding in the opportunity profiles. But there's something different about this test and profile that is different than the world. What we're going to look at now are the four triplicities. That is, we're going to look at the fire sign houses versus the earth sign houses versus the airy sign houses versus the watery sign houses. There are four triplicities. This test and profile is probably more important than any that we have covered so far for the whole year. And this is the most practical, the most useful. I do about anywhere from 3 to 5 counseling sessions per week. And I use this profile to get at things in people's lives more than any of the other profiles that we have gone into so far. Now, this profile is different than the world, because astrology is different from the world. Each of these four divisions of life is of equal importance in the horoscope. But the world isn't like that. The world has the 2nd, the 6th, and the 10th, which are the work houses or the professional houses. We spend half of our waking time, if we have an 8-hour work day, that's half of our waking time we spend in that activity, when we would normally expect to spend a quarter of our time if the world were based astrologically. I believe that this is due to the fact that we are in what in India they would call the Kala Yuga, and that means that the material world is ripe now. And you make hay while the sun shines, and somehow the necessity of feeding ourselves is what drives us forward in life, and to keep us moving, because otherwise we would just sort of loll around and get nothing done. The world has accentuated the workhouses to keep us going. But astrology isn't like that. And we, as human beings, are not like that. For example, if you go to a party, and somebody says, what do? You say, boy, I have great times with my friend. And they'll say, no, what do? You say, well, my brother and I do a lot of things together. And he says, no, what do you do? They're meaning the 2nd, the 6th, and the 10th. But if you have a lot of things in the 3rd, the 7th, and the 11th, which are relations with friends or relatives or with your spouse, those are opportunities that are more important to you. And some people feel very guilty, especially people who have a lot of things in the 1st, the 5th, and the 9th, and who spend half of their life in grad school. When you have a lot of things in the educational houses, you feel guilty because people are saying, "Aren't you making any money? What is your title, or what is your profession? How many figures do you make?" And and if a person is going to feel guilty, I think graduate students have a reason to feel guilty, but for other means, not because they have something. No. But you know what I'm trying to say? It's a relief to somebody to know that they're acting in character in pursuing education rather than pursuing profession. It's a big thing for a person to be at ease with what they're doing. And, they can give themselves wholeheartedly, because otherwise, a lot of people don't think they're doing the right thing. And this is really important. I had someone Tuesday evening came to me wanting to change professions because she found out that putting herbs in bottles was not very fulfilling and that she needed a different profession. And we looked at these and we saw that the professional houses were a little bit above par, and that the retreat houses, the 4th, the 8th, and the 12th, were strongly accentuated. And they are problem-solving houses. And this person had never considered a life spent helping people solve problems and having that integrated with professions. And this is really an extremely helpful test and profile. So let's just look at the 1st, the 5th, and the 9th. Roughly, those are personal houses. They deal with personal expression, how one comes out of oneself, or opportunities for personal assertion, how one can state oneself, or opportunities for education, on-the-job training, high school and college, grad school or professional school, something like that. They're educational houses. Also, opportunities to expand. First house is sort of like marking territory, like a tomcat or something like that. And the 5th house is just letting loose and broadening one's outlook. 9th house would be really broadening, really expansive. You travel the world over, or you start looking at philosophies that are universal in nature, and there's something very expansive. Also, they are houses of amusement, sort of reveling in the spirit. The houses that correspond to the earthy signs, the 2nd, the 6th, and the 10th, are accomplishment houses. They deal with responsibility, or work, or bread and butter, or profession, or occupation. The 3rd grouping is the ones that relate to Aries signs, and for the most part, they are opportunities for relating to others as equals. Not like who's above who, or not me against you, but relating to others as equals, such as neighbors, or brothers and sisters, or members of the mercantile co-op, or partners in a law firm, or spouses, or something like that, or friendship. The last grouping, the 4th, the 8th, and the 12th, has several different kinds of meaning. First off, it represents opportunities to retreat, to get away from it all. Not to vacate, but to just withdraw. They also are considered fated houses. That if there are a lot of planets in them, the individual most likely has some kind of fated destiny, And if there are squares especially, it means that there's something that has to be taken care of. I had an instance like that. I took one look at a chart. I used to put all the charts on the board. And one time when I was down on university doing the classes, there were about 70 people in the class. And I was putting all these charts on the board and looking at them. And somebody slipped one in of somebody else's that wasn't in the class. And I said, this person isn't in our class, but I'll mention it anyway because it's very interesting. And there were a whole bunch of squares between the 8th house and the 4th house. And I said, one glance at it, and I said, I hope this person has their insurance paid. Because this is somebody that is likely to all kinds of accidents, and those accidents could be very debilitating, and the person needs to be cautious. I didn't know it, but the person had already, it was somebody who was such a physical person that could walk a flight of steps up or down on the hands, standing on the hands, could walk a flight of steps up or down, and had been on drugs and alcohol both, and was in a horrible automobile accident and injured the spine right at the neck and was paralyzed from the neck down for the rest of life. It's just one looking at, just a few seconds, seeing 5 planets between the 4th and the 8th house in square, you can come to that conclusion right off the bat like that. All right. So the fated houses. They're also mystery houses. They deal with hidden and unseen things. Chiefly, they deal with the different ways of getting at the spiritual worlds. We'll look at them in detail in just a second. And they are solving houses, problem-solving houses, or they're cleansing houses, or sometimes they're time-out houses. They represent your cosmic time-outs. So let's look at each of these divisions piece by piece. The first house in the first triplicity deals with self-education. That is experiential education. That is on-the-job training. And when it comes to amusement, it's like childlike amusement. Like seeing the world like you're seeing it for the first time and sort of dawdling around and experiencing it directly. Also, it is personal expression. My style, tight pants. One of my students used to refer to me in private, I found out later, as TP, tight pants. I had Mars in the first house. It's almost like wearing armor. And as we said earlier, it's like marking your territory. The 5th house is just general play and general amusement. Let's go to the park, or let's go to the amusement park, or something like that. And the 5th house is general education. And it's the most generous kind of expression, the gift that you have to keep on giving, children. And it is giving as a way of expressing your essential being. The 9th house, for example, is higher education. If you go to divinity school or if you go to law school, that's the 9th house. Or if you express yourself to the world through some kind of publication, that's the 9th house. Or if you amuse yourself in a very big way, like traveling the world over, the 9th house is like that. And it is where you express yourself in your higher values. It is your personal philosophy. Looking at the second triplicity, it begins with Taurus, and that's the basic income and expenditures. It's the materials, the resources, the needs, and the products that you need. It's your basic responsibilities in life. It is objectification, where things represent you or things represent your effort. It is also procurement and possession. It's related to the other Venus sign house, which is law. Possession is 9/10 of the law in terms of ownership. The sixth house, if the second house is capital, the sixth house is labor. Function, process, skill, occupation, method, all of those kinds of things, hygienes, even the people you work with and the conditions that you work under. And it's the service that you provide. We are going from a country that was once a materials or a product-oriented country. As we're aging, we're becoming more of a service-oriented country. The 10th house in the grand economic triad, capital, labor, management. It's execution. It is the purview that only a professional has. You're looking from the top and you can weigh labor versus materials to come out with the right balance for success. And it is the recognition that you get. Fame, honor. Also, it is goals and objectives. You start out with stuff, but you want to get to the top. It's accomplishments. Looking at the third triplicity, it begins with relations with equals that have some degree of binding to them, such as brothers and sisters. You can't choose your brothers and sisters. They're just your brothers and sisters. Neighbors. You can move from a neighborhood to another neighborhood, but you always have to have neighbors. In-laws. There are always, you may want to associate with somebody, but there's always riders that go along with it. There's that attached kind of quality. There are interdependencies. As I said earlier, this is like mercantile cooperatives. I'll give you so much grain, I need so much fertilizer. And there's that reciprocal kind of quality. It's a barter-like quality. The seventh house still has attachment, but it represents relationships that you enter into with freedom, but once you have entered into them, you have formed a bond. And that indicates partnerships. You form a company. Everybody's an equal partner. You don't have to join if you don't want, but if you become a partner, then you are legally bound. Obviously, it is our spouses. And there the binding is pretty strong. It's invisible, but it's pretty strong. There's a legal bond, but it's not nearly as strong as the spiritual bond. Alter egos. If we choose people to reflect us, or to co-counsel us, when we enter into that relationship, we come in freely, but when we're in, we get the feedback, like it or not. So these are sharing relationships. They're not as much, have as much mercantile dependence. Ultimately, you come to the 11th house, and those are relationships with others as equals that are completely free. You don't have to see your friends every day. Some of you can see once every few years. And you choose your friends in freedom, and the thing that is great about friendship is that you are free. And with that freedom, you can be what you want to be. There's nothing held there. It also represents associates, people that you have interactions with that aren't necessary, but you're still with them. Also, it's do-good kinds of relationships. If you're involved in some kind of humanitarian kind of activity. The 4th, the 8th, and the 12th. The 4th is the personal subconscious, your collection of memories and experiences from this life. and the detritus that accumulates in that subconscious. Hang-ups, bad habits, traumatic experiences, all of those things. It's your personal mythology. My personal mythology is filled with 40s and 50s songs and song titles, so that when I talk to myself or when myself talks to me in the personal subconscious, it's always in song titles. And it represents subjectivity. And it's your personal retreat, going to your own personal space. It's also your personal downfalls, like the man who took the alcohol and the drugs both. It's the solution of personal problems. If you want to overcome your bad habits, the means for that is found in the 4th house. The 8th house represents solving shared problems, either those in the marriage or in small groups. I think I've mentioned it before in here that caseworkers that work with social workers that work with family units and things like that have a lot in the 8th house. It's also the threshold consciousness. It's how you put things into and get things out of the unconscious realms, whether it's the subconscious or the superconscious. It's like the French doors, they swing both ways. The 8th house is the house of losing and of letting go. It's the house of meaning without form. So it's a mystery house. And finally, the 12th house represents superconsciousness. Opportunities to be aware of the world of the gods. It is what the Jungians would call the collective unconscious. The 12th house deals with the solution of universal problems. We've talked about that. And institutional problems are the 12th house. And it is fated. It's probably the most fated house in the horoscope because it represents how much is ripe of unresolved destiny from past lives. So if you didn't face a lot of things for a lot of past lives, you may be carrying a big load of destiny, and before you can make any progress to seeing things clear in this life without looking through all of the psychological baggage that you're hauling around from past lives, you have to go through a lot of fated experiences. 12th house is also the house of self-undoing. As we mentioned earlier, everything progresses forward. And in any group, the first member of the group represents the basic issue of that group. In this case, let's take the 1st, the 6th, and the 9th. It is, I have these needs, is the basic thing. And all of the 2nd, the 6th, and the 10th are always going to have that basic needs kind of quality. However, one can, in those basic needs, the ultimate member is the 9th house and the 10th house, and it represents definite objectives, definite goals. I'm getting to the top. I'm going to be president of the country club or whatever it is like that. If we take the Mandelic standard, Aries and the 1st, the Leo and the 5th, and Sagittarius and the 9th, the ultimate of that group is purpose. Therefore, we can abstract from that and we can say that the trine relationship is such that in a trine something finds purpose in the next thing forward, the next trine element forward. So we've abstracted from the standard, from the 1st of it to get the whole notion of the ultimate concept of purpose. Now let's apply it to the 2nd, and the 6th, and the 10th. Ownership finds purpose in use. If you just hold on to things, you don't find the purpose of them. You only find them in using. Use or technique or method finds purpose in goals. That is to say, if you only keeping things orderly and you're working on the method all the time, you're never going to get anywhere. Just like you could get hung up on owning something and hanging on to it, you can get all tied up in just activity. But if you have a goal, then you can adjust your method or your technique to reach that goal. Like if you're going to climb a mountain, you train differently for climbing a mountain than if you're going to run a race. And so the training or the methodology is the sixth house. But on the other hand, when you get on the top, you can't just stay on the top just for the sake of being on the top. The only way you can justify being on top is to be productive. You have to be able to produce something out of your position or you're not worthy of that position. All right, these are the handouts from tonight. They have basically everything that we have talked about. Plus, at the very end, there is a chart. And it's a chart which you should all be familiar with now. The very last thing of all is called the Grand Composite Table of Triplicities. And we take all of these triplicities and we just break it down in terms of their Mandelic composition. And that is so that we can get a feel of what each of the triplicities is like. These notes and what we've covered tonight is very much accentuating the triplicities, and that's because I think they're so important. So if you look at that table at the end, the fact that the first, the fifth, and the ninth have two planets that are north and one south, that's an indication that that triplicity is very personal in its orientation. And it has one east and two west, indicates that even though it's personal, it's always looking at the other person. And so from each of these things, you can understand each of the triplicities a little more, and you can understand what they point to in life. And that's why I make those tables. Maybe someday I'll make a whole book full of these different kinds of Mandelic tables, and we'll do nothing but talk about them. We'll talk about life for a whole night. All right, this is, yes. No, go ahead.
I wanted to get back to your story about the chart that was placed on the board. I thought you said it was squared 4th and 8th. Was that?
Yes, you can have squares between 4th and 8th.
It had to be at the extreme degrees, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it all depends. No, because of the obliquity of the ecliptic, sometimes the houses, even though they look from here like they're all the same size, the heavens are pinched because of the way things are rising. It's fairly easy to have a square between the fourth and 8th house. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's again with the houses getting bigger and smaller. We'll get.
I understand that portion, but I understood regardless of how big the house was, there were X number of degrees in the sign.
Yes, right. There would still be 90 degrees apart, but they would be 4 houses apart. And it's not uncommon for there to be 4 houses within 90 degrees.
As the wheel.
Yes.
Not as the...
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. I should sometime... I've got a nice fast computer now. I should sometime make something and show, at a given place, show the constant change of time of, throughout a day, throughout 24 hours, say like for Madison, Wisconsin, and just show how the houses increase and decrease as the sidereal times change. And some of the houses will get real big and some will get real small. Yeah. I'd like to do something like that at one time. I was going to one time do it with flickies, but it was too big of a job. You know, flickies, like when you take out pages and you just spin them, you know, just flip them like that. All right, this is the assignment. The assignment is we're going to do all of the opportunity tests, all 6 of them, but we're only going to work on the first 8 charts. We're not, and then the next time we'll do the next 8 charts because it's just too big to try and do all 16 with 6 tests and cross-profilings all in one sitting. And I'm going to try to figure out a way so that what I say is different than what is in the notes, so that the spoken part and the written part are 2 different things. And that's it for tonight.
I have, if I can remember, if you have a planet, for example, that acts more universally, specifically Uranus.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in a different place. Just run through that once on any of them, rather than the 11th.
You mean put Uranus in the first house?
Just run it. I mean, as it compares to what you were saying.
All right. Uranus in the first house would indicate that the experiences with Uranus would be very sharp, and they would be personal, and they would be from early childhood. They would have to do about with one's person. Like I had a friend at one time, both of her parents were Freudian psychoanalysts, and she had Uranus in the first house, and she was psychoanalyzed and raised according to psychoanalysis from early childhood on. And she had all kinds of insights, but she had a hard time really being herself because of all of the insights that were hurled at her. And she's this and this and this, you know, it couldn't be dynamic. Whereas Uranus in the second house might indicate that, like Ron's father-in-law, might be somebody like Uranus in the second house, somebody that's creative and makes discoveries about substances and materials and would have a sustained job all of life long. The opportunity or the experience of Uranus would be keeping that creativity going as far as materials are concerned. Like I have Uranus in the 8th house, and I'm continuously having to bring astrology into the modern world because I use it sitting one-on-one, solving shared problems, and I discover the things in the process of trying to help people. And it's not just a flash in the pan thing, which it might be if it were angular, but because it's succeedent, it's something that all of my life long I am to be a discoverer, I am to be an innovator in order to make things work.
Well, you said that angular, what about the 4th house?
That's angular also.
Yeah, but how would that play out?
Yeah, it's making me work. It's excellent for making discoveries about who and what you are, but, oh boy, the only picture that comes to mind is very gross. And being a woman, you might not appreciate it. When you pee, the high ionization of the urine stands out. And it is a standout experience. But very quickly it dissolves into the general solution in the potty. So that if you watch your urine as you're peeing, you can see where it is, you can see that it's different than what's in the toilet bowl, but only for a second, and then it dissolves. And if you make discoveries about your subconscious, it's like that. You make a discovery, but it isn't something that you keep on discovering. It just then enters into the general experience of your personal subconscious. She said, I'll never ask you a question again.
I know what the question was now. I mean, so if you've got, for example, Uranus in the first house.
Yes.
All right. Now, the houses happen to be shifted.
Yeah, right.
The houses happen to be shifted in such a manner because of time of day and so on that they're way over here. You've got 3 houses in here or 4 houses.
Yeah.
But does that change then the flavor of it as far as its
No, that would have more to do with the aspects, not with the house position.
Not with the house position.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned one thing earlier about when you have a different sign on the house cusp.
Yes.
The character of the house.
Yes.
In one case, one would win, in another case.
Yeah, it would be more dominant.
More dominant.
Yeah. Only experience can show you that. By the way, there's some things on that table that are really interesting. There's one thing that needs to be explained about the table. It is the 4th row down in the table. Yes, yeah. The 4th row down, what we're talking about when it says the odd houses, the 1st and the 5th and the 9th are odd houses because they're 1st and 3rd. Yeah. This is the 1st and 3rd are odd odds. This is an even odd because it's the 2nd odd. This is, all right, 1st, 5th, and 9th. This is the 1st house is an odd because 1st is odd and the 1st of the triplicity is odd. The 3rd is an even odd, meaning to say it isn't quite as odd because it's the 2nd of the odd. I'm trying to introduce you into Pythagorean spiritual number theory. No, I don't think that was a gross analogy at all.
However, I think it's easier for men.
Yes. All right. That's it.
If first house, is the first house always going to be a fire triplicity?
Yes.
Regardless of
What signs are there? Yeah, that's right. We're only counting the houses now. We don't care about the signs in the least.
Okay.
And that's what we're going to do when we do all the tests and profiles for next time.
Then when you combine what's in there, you still have to take it into account as a
Yeah. Yeah, you can even forget that it's a fire triplicity because you got enough keywords that it doesn't depend on knowing the signs that they correspond to. All right. Thank you very much. Yeah.